I'm down here at the community garden again, and I'm watching the mozzies again. So, yes, I got a little bit, I've been gardening in the evening. It's been really nice over the last few days to garden in the evening, actually. So if you've got some time, the wind seems to die down in the evening, and yeah, it's really beautiful. It's been nice and warm, and you won't get sunburnt anytime after sort of 5:36. So that's how I've been getting my gardening done over the last week or two. So welcome. This morning we're going to be talking about vines and melons, and some ways, some of the ones that you can grow here. And I just realised I left some stuff in the car. Well, I have to do without it. That's all good. Firstly, so vines and melons, there's a big family of curcubits, as they're called, which covers your zucchini or cucumber and pumpkins and all of those sort of, like, I guess you'd say large. They're actually fruits because they've got the seeds inside of them, and most of them grow via a vine. So watermelons as well, cantaloupe, they're in your melon family, melons. And so what we want to do is talk today about how we're going to grow them, some of the things that we might need to know about them, and yeah, when to grow them. So now is the best time to plant if you can get them in the ground ASAP. They do have a longer growing season, or required growing season. So if you plant pumpkins now, they won't be really ready until March. But they do have a long shelf life, for example. Cucumbers, on the other hand, they'll be ready. They'll start flowering sooner, and you can start picking them as needed when they're the size you want. And so most people, depending on the variety of cucumber, obviously, pick them when, they're sort of smallish, because they're a little bit sweeter then, and you get less, the seeds are less developed, so you get less of the sort of the inside goopy stuff where that surrounds the seeds. So then you've got your melons, watermelon, cantaloupe, honeydew, all of those guys, and there's a whole heap of variety there that you can look through. There's cucamelons, so it's a cross between a cucumber and a watermelon, but it looks about the size of a large grape, and they're very sweet. My girls have them. They're like lollies for them, and all sorts of fancy ones out there. So in general, your melons, they'll be picked not successively like, say, a cucumber or a zucchini. Most of them on a single vine will be ready at a similar time. There might be a week or two in between, but you won't have like some now and some in 2 months' time. When we're looking at pumpkins, and there's one zucchini called a tromboncino zucchini, which is a brilliant zucchini because it doesn't have any of it has very few seeds in it, and it doesn't have the inside sort of squishy a bit that can go a little bit sort of soggy when you cook it and stuff. The tromboncino zucchinis are a brilliant variety, highly recommend. And they're very high fruiting, like yield wise. So those and pumpkins are very vigorous vines. So if you have a small garden, I don't recommend growing them because that's all you're going to have in your garden. So they have large leaves that take up a lot of space, and they will, once they're established, they will literally run away and create large vines. Some of them can grow like 5 to 10 meter vines. So you're looking at quite a large area if you want to let it ramble and produce fruit. Another one is a shark fin melon, which those guys, it's a huge, it looks like a watermelon. It's used in a lot of Asian cooking, or it can be used in Asian cooking as well as South American cooking. It looks like a giant watermelon, but it's not. It can be prepared in a whole heap of different ways. Their vines can grow up to 15 meters. So it's a huge vine, a very strong vine as well, and very vigorous in its growth, obviously. So just be aware when you're actually looking at what type of pumpkin, or and you can get some then dwarf varieties or smaller variety of pumpkins, like the golden nugget pumpkin, which is quite compact. So when you're looking at what type of pumpkin, especially pumpkins, because they're the ones that can go in all directions. Have a look at the space requirements on if you're getting a packet of seeds, or Google that, and just make sure the variety is going to actually be okay for the area that you have available. When we're looking at, say, cucumbers are a great one to grow because we eat a lot of cucumbers in my family goes through at least a cucumber a day. So if we can grow as many as we can, we're still probably going to have to buy a few. So they can be grown on the ground. However, they do best when they're on a trellis or some sort of supporting structure for two reasons. One, your snails don't get your fruit, and the slugs and snails don't get the fruit that's lying on the ground, and the fruit also doesn't rot on the ground if the ground is moist. And they can get more sunlight and more airflow. And when they get more sunlight and air, they grow more, so you get more fruit. When they get more airflow, they're less likely to harbor disease like mold and mildew and things like that. So you'll have a longer fruiting season. Zucchinis. Zucchinis are one of my favorite vegetables to grow over summer, though my family doesn't always agree. They are highly prolific in their fruiting in general. So there's quite a few different varieties. One of the nice sort of robust varieties is called blackjack. And as I said, the tromboncino zucchini, if you want one that's actually going to run like a vine. Most of the other zucchinis are quite compact, and so their vine might only be maybe at full growth, maybe 1 to 1.5 meters max. So they're quite compact, and what they do is their leaves are very close together, and their fruit, so their flowers are very close together as well. And which means that they don't actually need that whole big space. And you can also, with zucchinis, they're like cucumbers. You're cutting them and harvesting fruit for a long period of time. With zucchinis, when you harvest the fruit is really important. Don't let them grow too big. And literally, if you look one day and go, oh, I'm not sure it's big enough, the next day it'll be twice the size. So if you think it's a little bit small but still edible, just take it. You'll be fine. So for a family of 4, we have 2 to 3 zucchini plants, and that does us more than enough. My girls would say more than enough. We'd only need 1. So they're prolific in terms of their growth and their fruiting. When we're looking at things like melons, I'm just going to put all the melons together. Watermelons, you've got cantaloupe, and you've got honeydew and rock melon, that sort of family as well. They are more delicate than your pumpkins and zucchinis. You even see the vine. The vine is a lot narrower, or like skinnier, the actual vine. They are a lot more delicate, and they are not as robust as your pumpkins and zucchinis. And so you do need to be a little bit careful with them in terms of making sure they've got enough water. They're sort of more like a bit of a fragile friend, if you want. They will reward you, but you need to give them a little bit more TLC. And they will grow, again, not to the same extent as a pumpkin, so in terms of space, length, but if you think about the size of a watermelon, you're going to need some space there for the fruit. And same for your cantaloupes and your honeydews. And so making sure that you give them airflow so that they don't get that mold and mildew, especially if we get some of these humid days we often get around Christmas. We want to really make sure that we don't let them be too moist. So it needs enough airflow so that there's no moisture collecting under the leaves and stuff and getting them and mold being able to take hold. That being said, we do need to make sure their roots are watered, because in these days like today, I'm even just looking at some of the seedlings I got out of the car half an hour ago, and some of them are really wilted. So we want to make sure we keep that water up to them on the hot days so that they don't die. Because if especially with the smaller diameter vines, they can get fried a little bit more easily than the larger vines. With watermelon, you can train that upper trellis. Same with your honeydews and rock melons. However, if you're going to do that, you will need to support the fruit because quite often what will happen as the fruit grows, the vine will then break off or get dinted or like cut off a little bit from however it's hanging. So some support for your fruit is going to be needed. You can use stockings, you can use anything that's got just a little bit of little give. So you can use, there's cotton stretchy ties and things like that you can get. You can even use a string bag or something. Don't use plastic because it still needs that airflow around it, and you just need something that's kind of holding it but not going to cover the whole skin. It likes to breathe. Same with rock melons and honeydews, but a lesser extent to supporting the fruit juice. You just have to play that by ear as the fruit grows. So, the other thing about a lot of your vines is what you'll find if you have fruit trees, that your vines will love your fruit trees as a support. So I've got some apple trees and a plum tree that quite often just you're like, oh look, there's a pumpkin halfway up. So and that's fine. They work really well together, as long as you just make sure that the fruit from one is not disturbing the fruit from the other, if that makes sense. So make sure they've got some space there to grow. So one of the most common issues with this variety of, or this family of veggies and fruits is snails. So you could plant some out there today and go back and you would think the ground is bare tomorrow because of snails and slugs. They absolutely love this variety of family, especially when the seedlings are small. So that, pumpkins, zucchinis, cucumbers, the works. So make sure that when you're planting them, that you have some protection in place, whether you want to use snail bait, a whole heap of cracked eggshells, whatever you decide, make sure you protect them, especially for that first little while, from snails and slugs, because they are very, very easily got and destroyed by that. The other is when they're small. So if you've planted some of these out in the last day or two, today, this really hot, drying wind can be really detrimental to their growth. And so what happens is you'll see the leaves first start to wilt, and that's okay. They have a really large leaf, so they actually don't like a lot of full sun all the time. So the leaves start to wilt, but if they don't get any moisture, those leaves will die, and that part of the vine will then be exposed and can also get damaged. So if you have little seedlings on a day like today, highly recommend giving them a water at lunchtime to give them just that little bit of extra water for throughout the day, or either way, protect them from the sun. So make up a makeshift shelter. I like using large pots, and just you kind of work out once you put the pot down where the shadow's going to fall, and I just move it maybe twice during the day, and just for these really hot days. I don't do it every day, just while they're small, so that they don't get that direct sunlight, which really dries their leaves out. The other thing you can use, and this might sound a little bit silly, you can go out and buy shade cloth if you really want to, but I'm all for using whatever you've got at home. Garden chairs is another one. So if you've got some outdoor furniture, you should see our garden some days. It's a bit crazy. Or anything that's going to be out, that casts anything that you can put up vertically. You can even put a stake in and attach some cardboard to it. It doesn't matter, as long as it's not touching the plant. You don't want something that, especially if you're using pots that are dark in color, if that's touching the plant, then they'll just emanate the heat directly to the plant too. So make sure you've got a little bit of a gap between the pot and the plant. But yeah, use whatever you've got around. It's a temporary temporary little shade there, so it doesn't have to be a permanent, massively expensive structure. And then when on the weekend, when the temperature cools down, you can just move it. That's fine. And that's another way of getting them used to being outdoors in the hot sun, or on these hot days as well. So I don't think there's any questions at the moment. Nope. Okay, awesome. So the other thing, so once we've got our plants established, what you're going to find is in about a month or so, once they're established, you're going to start getting flowers. And that's awesome, because flowers come before fruit. And on these types of plants, there's two types of fruit. And two types of fruit. There's one type of fruit. There is two types of flowers. And I can't actually show you any because they're not actually out as yet. But they're male flowers and female flowers. And the male flowers will have, technical names are completely lost for the moment. It's got it's a stamen in the middle, and it's covered in pollen. And you'll actually see, when you see the male flowers usually come first, and you'll go, oh no, I've got no female flowers. And then female flowers will come later and the male flowers might have all died off. And you're like, I don't know what to do now. Because they need to be both at the same time for the female to get pollinated by the male. The way you'll be able to tell the female apart is underneath the flower, you'll see a little circle or a little bump, and that's your fruit. So the flower does not turn into the fruit. The fruit's actually below the flower. And so with a zucchini, you'll see the flower, and then you'll see almost like a long, skinny, it might only be a centimetre long or less, piece underneath the female flower. And the female flower will actually look like it's almost got a claw in the middle. And that's so that the bees, when the bees go in, or whatever's pollinating goes in, those little, it kind of look like sticky claws almost, or sticky pads. They will then the pollen will get stuck to that, and that's the way they are pollinated. Now what can happen is you go, I've got an abundance of flower but I didn't get any fruit. And has usually happened is that they haven't got pollinated in time. They usually have a window of 1 to 2 days, so not a great huge window. And if you don't have a lot of bees around, the bees may not have got to every flower, or they may have got a different pollen into, a non-compatible pollen into that flower. So one way to help with pollination is actually doing it yourself. And this is best done first thing in the morning. So right away, because that's when the flowers are just starting to open up. So sort of between, usually if it's school time, usually put the kids on the bus, do that all that morning routine, and then go out before it gets too hot. And then what you're doing is you grab the male flower, so actually pick the male flower, pull the petals off, and you'll have like a paintbrush. So there'll be the stick with the all covered in pollen, and you'll be able to tell it looks really fuzzy when it's full of pollen. If it looks really smooth, it means the bees have already come and got all the pollen. So maybe choose a different one. And the pollen will, if you just touch it, your hands will go yellow. And some pollen stain, by the way, so they stain your clothes and your fingers. So we're going to get that paintbrush and go find all those female flowers and just stick the paintbrush down in the middle, and you'll see the pollen will actually fall off. One male flower can usually, if you've got one per female fruit, great. If you use one male flower to 2 to 3 female flowers, that works pretty well too. With zucchinis and pumpkins, you've got these like pretty chunky flowers to work with. With your watermelons, your rock melons, and your cucumbers, much more delicate flowers. So they're a little bit more trickier to get right. I do find that in general, cucumbers and the rock melons and that, they poll itself, or like the micro wasps and the bees and everything seem to do a better pollination job there than with the zucchinis and the pumpkins. So even though we have a beehive, I still like to go self-pollinate a lot of our vines if I get a chance to, every couple of days. So that comes later in the season, sort of around, I don't know, late December onwards. And it really depends on when you get your vines in the ground. So what I did have to show you, which I left in the car, your seeds are quite large, and you know the size of a pumpkin seed. Like literally when you open up a pumpkin, there's a lot of seeds inside. You can actually grow from them too, by the way. But those seeds, they can go directly in the ground. I usually plant a clump of, say, 3 to 5 seeds in a small area. Once they're established, I just pick it out to 2. So I pick the 2 that look the strongest and let them grow in opposite directions. For some reason, they seem to like to grow in pairs. Maybe they just get lonely if they're by themselves. I don't know. But they say, yeah, and then you can grow them over. When you're planting them, the seeds need to go sort of 2-3 centimeters into the ground. That gives them a good, nice, solid foundation for their roots and their stems and everything. What else? Any other tips or questions? I think that's most of what I wanted to say. Oh, I can go into harvest actually. So this is the end of the season. So come back to this bit towards the end of summer. So harvesting your cucumbers and your zucchinis, you're just doing that all the way through. With your melons and your pumpkins, you basically want the vine to die before you harvest, because that means the fruit is then fully finished. It's ready. The seeds are fully formed inside. And that means that that piece of fruit has actually got quite a long shelf life. So uncut pumpkins, we've got our last one on the bench at the moment from last season. So that we picked that. This one in particular, the reason it's there is we found it in winter when I was weeding the garden. I'm like, oh look, another pumpkin. So so with your pumpkins, they've got a hugely long shelf life. Watermelons, not so much. They've got a lot of moisture inside them, but still, they're like, you don't have to eat them the same day that you pick it. And zucchinis, you're picking them immaturely, so you're not letting them mature. If you, which means their shelf life is short. Same with cucumbers. If you let a zucchini go to full size, so usually towards the end of March, I let 1 or 2 zucchinis just go. And they honestly, they get to this big, you can't actually see my hands. So they get to this big. They get to 60, 70 centimeters long, and they're fat. Like what is that, 15, 20 centimeters wide? Like, they're huge. No flavor, wouldn't eat them. But inside, they've got some nice chunky seeds, and that's what I use for next season. And the way I keep them is I literally take that, when the vines died, I take that zucchini and stick it on a rack. And then come September, I chop it up and plant it. So that's how nature does it. So works for me. Same with the cucumbers. I let a couple go. Cucumbers are a little bit harder to grab the seeds. Their seeds seem to be a little bit more delicate. But yeah, let it go to seed. And same with your rock melons and your cantaloupes and all of that sort of stuff. So, and that's towards the end of the season. So that's kind of how you harvest. And pumpkins, just leave them until the vine is dead, like dead, brown. The stem is brown, and when you chop them off, don't break the little. So you'll see. I'm trying to see if you can. So on the top of a pumpkin, there's a little tiny stem, and then that connects to the vine that goes off. This little stem, keep that attached to the pumpkin, because if you break it off, it creates like a cut in the skin, and then that is an entry for mold, and it starts to go off and everything. You'll actually see, this is actually really surprising. I had one pumpkin that I dropped as I was bringing it in one year, and it got like a little nick in the skin. And I'm like, oh, that's annoying, because once you've got like cuts in the skin and everything, it's you've penetrated the skin, and it's a point of weakness basically. After the pumpkin had been cut from the vine, so I dropped it after it had been cut, and it had this little slit about maybe 1 or 2 centimeters. And I was like, I'll just put it outside. I'll let it dry out, like let the cut dry out and see what happens. It actually self-healed. So it still had enough energy within that pumpkin just to heal that little cut, and it lasted fine. It didn't go moldy, it didn't go off. That being said, I've had others that have had dints and stuff in them, more bruising, that you just need to check your pumpkins and everything that you're storing to make sure they're not starting to go off, and use them ASAP if you do see like a little like soft patch or whatever. Now, I did see a question pop up about prickly leaves. Where did it go? Let's see if we can do this. Okay, so zucchinis have prickly leaves. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. They have these little almost like hair-like prickles that are really frustrating. And cucumbers, the actual fruit has spines on it when you pick it from the vine. So just be aware of that. If your cucumbers turn out prickly, that's okay. Just get a piece of paper towel and you sort of hold the cucumber and rub, and the prickles fall off quite easily. With your prickly leaves, yep, you can take a couple off from the zucchini to harvest, or if need be. The other thing is I often use gloves when I'm working with the zucchinis or with the cucumber, like getting the prickles off the cucumbers, and then that just does, they don't get into my skin. Someone just asked how to store pumpkins. What you need when you're storing pumpkins is it needs to be away from moisture, fairly cool, constant temperature if you can, and it needs to have airflow. So we have a shoe rack that is, you know, the wire racks. It's like 2 or 3 high, and we have to space them out because pumpkins are a lot heavier than shoes, and we just sit them there. I leave them outside for a couple of weeks under cover, just out the back to let them dry out fully once I pick them up off the ground, and then bring them inside. You need to do that before, if you get frost in your areas. So especially if anyone lives along the Werribee River area, they seem to get a bit more frost than us, even though we're only a couple of k's away. You need to harvest before the first frosts, or before the temperature get low, because you don't want your pumpkins to start to freeze, because when they unfreeze they go mushy. So that's a little hint of how when you need to harvest them as well. So usually most of my harvest is done by April, May for pumpkins. And storing them, just make sure they have airflow. Make sure that you are checking them on a semi-regular basis. Like, it doesn't have to be every day or even every week, but checking them every now and then just to make sure, in case they get like a patch that might be going a little bit off, you can use it and cut that little bit out. But if you let it fester, then obviously you're going to get less pumpkin. So we store ours. It's going to sound really funny. We store ours near the front door, like behind the front door where it opens, because that area of the house is it's fairly constant in temperature, or like much more constant than the garage, for example, which you can get very cold, then warm with the heat and everything. So we just keep them there, and they're close to the kitchen, so they're nice and easy to use. Okay. Information about asparagus and fertilizer. So I'll go with fertilizer. You can give your pumpkins and zucchinis as much like natural fertilizer as you want. They will love it. They don't need a lot. They're pretty self-sufficient. If pumpkins find that they aren't getting enough nutrients or water from the main base plant, what they'll actually do is send out more roots at different nodules along the vine. So what you'll find when you pick up if you try and move your pumpkin vine sometimes, is that there's actually roots along the way. And that's kind of a sign saying, oh, I'm not quite getting what I need from the base plant, or there's been some damage somewhere along the vine. Maybe someone stepped on the vine and it's not broken, but everything's not getting through. And so they'll send out more roots down the vine as well. So you can use an organic fertilizer. Compost is great. I love compost because it has a wide variety of nutrients in there. So if you're not quite sure what you need, just chuck on a general purpose fertilizer or some compost. And manures. And if you're going to use manures, make sure you let them age for a little bit before you put them on. So like literally let them sit for a week or two, just so that some of them are can be quite acidic and burn plants. Give them some space around the actual stem. So don't put your compost or your fertilizer or your manure right up to the stem, because you can get little burns there too. Asparagus. I love asparagus. Asparagus right now, if you have asparagus in the ground, you'll think that it's gone berserk. It's probably 1 to 2 meters tall in this big feathery fronds. So the asparagus that we eat is actually a very immature stem. And once it goes off, so this time of year, it's putting out flowers. It's essentially going to seed. And if you can, let it go. Just let it go. Let it do its thing over summer, and it'll look a little bit messy for the next month or two. And then because what those fronds are doing now is actually giving back to the bulb, to the crown, and giving it more energy so that it can be bigger and better next year. If you cut them off now, you've basically cut off their energy source for a couple of months, or reduced it for a couple of months, and that means that you're not going to get the same growth in the base, in the crown, and that means that you won't have as many shoots for next year. When you're harvesting asparagus, it's going to be like next late winter, early spring. You don't want to harvest anything that's smaller than your finger. So if you see a frond that's really narrow, and this is especially if your crown is young, let it go. Let it go to, like, let it grow, because that is going to be giving energy back to the crown. If you keep cutting off every single shoot, your crown's not going to grow, and you're not going to get big fat asparagus pieces from that ever. So it's going to take a lot of time. So the first harvest from asparagus is usually 3 to 4 years from seed. If you've got an established crown, it might be 1 to 2 years. So just be aware, and only take a couple or a few shoots and let them grow again. My asparagus is taller than me at the moment. It's everywhere, and it's falling onto our path now, so it might get a little bit of a trim, but I'm trying to leave it there as long as possible, because I know that's what's going to next year. Then we have a type of asparagus called Fat Bastard, and it is like thumb size or fatter. Like, it's really thick and it's really juicy. It's really yum. So yeah, I know that if I leave those there now, then I'll have more to harvest for next year. Okay, one more. What sort of fertilizer can be used in a wicking bed? Anything that you would usually use in your garden. You can treat it just like a garden. So I would, what happens quite often with wicking beds is you'll get some compression, or like the soil will start to compact. So what I like to do is I just leave most of it. But if you want, you can turn the top little bit over if it's compacting. If it's just if it's hard, if it's fine, you don't need to do much. And then I just lay a manure or for compost or whatever I've got, and then put some mulch on top and go for it again. So you can kind of just like add an extra layer, and that mulch that you put on the very top breaks down and makes a new layer itself. So yeah, use whatever fertilizer you've got, liquid fertilizer, sea soil, whatever. I did not pick, oh, sorry, I just have to keep clicking my phone every time I said. I did not pick asparagus spears in time, and now it's long. Should I cut it off or leave it? Just, if you can, I know some people find it tricky to leave their gardens to go messy or look a little bit messy, but if you can leave it, yeah, leave it, definitely, so that it gives back that energy to the crown. And when, so later in summer, late summer, early autumn, those spears will, then now feathers, I guess, are huge when they fully grow. They will start to go brown, yellow, then brown, and die off. And then, yeah, get rid of them then. So let them do their course, go through the course. I'm really, I'm all for letting nature do its thing and intervening as little as possible, because that seems, to me, that seems the best way to get the best food, right? So if you, you leave stuff go to seed, let the bees come in and collect the nectar and the pollen from the flowers. Let the peas and everything go to seed, so you've got some for next year, and that saves you money. And it also allows the nutrients to basically, if there's anything left as the plant dies, it goes back into the ground. So I think it's a beautiful cycle if you can leave things go to seed and die off naturally. Obviously, sometimes that's not possible, but if you can, yeah, it's a better way to do it, I reckon. Cool. I don't know if there's any other questions. I'm just going to grab a drink because it's getting really hot here.
I think you've managed to experience every sort of weather. The outdoor shoots. You've had wind, you've had rain, now heat.
That works. Yeah, it's quite nice to be warm. I think I prefer to be a little bit warm than a little bit cold. But yeah, it's I feel like I should have wore a singlet instead.
I must admit, I went outside to just check one of my plants, and yeah, I was the same, thinking, oh, it's actually a bit warmer than I thought it was. So yeah.
Well, tomorrow won't get as hot as it was at 8:30 this morning. So
Yeah, I know.
Cool
Up, down,
changes
up,
coming
down.
through.
Does anyone else have any other questions that they would like to ask? If not, we've got 3 different types of pumpkins. Can I collect the seeds?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. Thank you. Is it Jody for
Jody.
pointing that out? So if you have, I'm just going to move back because that sun's going to come over and give the. There we go. Yeah. So if you have different varieties of a thing or of a plant, even to the point of like pumpkins and zucchinis, cucumbers and zucchinis, so similar like cousins, they will cross-pollinate, or they can, I should say, cross-pollinate. So yes, you can collect the seeds. However, you're not guaranteed to get the same fruit from that. So even if you buy a butternut pumpkin, say from the supermarket, the seeds inside may not be butternut pumpkin. They may be if that's all that was grown in the field, but they may not necessarily be. And pumpkins cross-pollinate very easily. And I have a feeling that my pumpkins and zucchinis may have cross-pollinated at some stage with one batch of my seeds because they're very interesting shaped pumpkins. Like they're quite long and skinny. So I don't know. I'm not sure if that's possible, but I feel that might be. So yeah, if you want to sort of isolate that variety, what you need to do is you need to get in before the bees. So this is early in the morning because bees get up as soon as it's light and warm. So this morning they would have been up at like way before me. I don't even know what time the sun rises at the moment, but they would have been up early because it was warm. And they will be very busy today. Water and nectar, water for the hive, nectar and pollen, they'll be out in force. So what you need to do is need to monitor your plant really carefully and find out when there is a male and a female about to bloom at the same time. Net them with some, so the night before even, if you can see they're going to bloom the next day, the night before, put a mesh bag over the top. So you can either use, the mesh bags you can use for shopping, for your produce and stuff, anything like that. They're small so the bees can't get in. And first thing in the morning, go out and pollinate it yourself with that male flower, pollinate the female flower and cover that female flower with a mesh bag until the flower falls off. So until the flower dies and you've got the fruit, it's actually the ovaries, by the way, actually producing and growing. Now, it's really good to label that piece of fruit because by just like maybe putting a stake next to it or something, because when you do it, you go, oh yeah, I'll know which one it was. And then you get 4 or 5 other pumpkins on that same vine and you go, oh, I'm not sure which one it is now. So make sure you just put a stake or put, something near it. Try not to tie anything around the fruit itself. You could put something very, very loosely around the stem, but you don't want to cut off any growth or, inhibit or potentially damage the stem so that the fruit dies off or something. So it is a little bit of a process if you've got different varieties in your garden, but definitely possible to get a single variety back if you put the diligence, if you got your due diligence there. Now there's a question about corn. Do corn plants need to be staked? They shouldn't. That being said, in the wind over the last couple of days, so many things are now on a lean in my garden. So they shouldn't need to be staked. They should actually hold each other up. But if it's in a very windy place, you could, and that will just, help to stop any further damage. Generally, no, though. And when you're planting corn, they should be in a nice chunky block, so that the outside ones they might get a little bit more buffeted, but you do need them. You do need a lot of corn, or a fair sized corn bed, because corn is wind pollinated. It's one of the few staple foods. This is pretty cool, actually. One of the few staple foods that we have that has nothing to do with insect pollination. So it's wind pollinated, which means you'll see these fluffy tufts that come out the top, and that is then blown by the wind across the rest of the field. Now, if you only have 1 or 2 plants, if the wind blows the wrong way, you're not going to get any corn. It's going to look, when you open it up, it'll look like there's 5 or 6 little kernels of corn and the rest haven't developed. And it's a really common problem with homegrown corn. So you do need a chunky block, sort of 1 to 2 meters square is a good sized chunk of corn so that things get pollinated quite well. In that same garden bed, by the way, you can plant beans, and beans will climb up, and cucumber as well. They'll climb up the corn as well as they grow. So you can do some companion planting that way. Well, all good. If there's no other questions. Go out this evening. In the garden. I highly recommend this evening rather than right now.